Hello and welcome to Lost Love Mystery, where we explore the twists and turns of love, the pain of betrayal, and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart. For 6 years, I believed I had a happy marriage. I was confident in what Emily and I had built, a life full of routines, small joys, and the kind of comfort that comes from truly knowing someone. Every morning, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air as she moved around the house, always up before me, always ready to tackle the day. Morning, sleepyhead. She'd greet me, pressing a warm mug into my hands with a bright smile. Her blue eyes still sparkled, the same way they had when we first met. Over breakfast, we'd talk about our plans. She had meetings at her marketing firm. I had clients to meet for my consulting work. The days were structured, predictable, and, I thought, secure. Then one weekend, her sister, Claire, came to visit. Claire and Emily had always been close. Whenever she stayed over, they'd spend hours catching up, laughing over wine late into the night. I never minded. It gave me time to tinker with my woodworking projects in the garage. That night, as I walked through the living room to grab a drink from the kitchen, I noticed something odd. They were deep in conversation, laughing, until they saw me. Their laughter stopped abruptly, and Emily's face flushed slightly. "Just girl talk," she said quickly, recovering with a smile. I smiled back, brushing it off. But looking back, that was the moment I should have realized something was off. The next few days, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Emily was spending more time on her phone, tilting the screen away whenever I passed by. She had started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse: work, a campaign deadline, bad traffic. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, trust was the foundation of our marriage. Or so I thought. One Saturday night, Emily and Claire went out for drinks. I stayed up, half watching TV, half waiting for them to return. It was past midnight when I heard their hushed voices as they stumbled through the front door. If I could go back, Emily's voice was softer now. I don't know if I would have said yes. A hollow laugh followed. I froze. My chest tightened as her words echoed in my mind. What did she mean? Was I reading too much into it? I told myself they were just drunk, that it was nothing serious. But doubt had already settled deep in my bones. For the first time, I wondered, was our marriage as solid as I thought it was? The doubt that had planted itself in my mind after overhearing Emily's words refused to go away. I tried to push it down, tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But as the days passed, the signs only became clearer. Emily's phone was always in her hand. She never used to care about it much before. She'd leave it lying around on the couch on the kitchen counter, even in the bedroom. Now, it was always with her, always face down. Whenever I walked into her room, she'd quickly exit out of whatever she was doing, her movements a little too rehearsed, too careful. She started working late more often, coming home hours after I expected her. "The office is a mess," she'd say. "I have so much on my plate." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something was telling me that this wasn't just about work. Claire had left a few days after their night out, but something about her behavior during her visit kept playing in my head. She had been oddly distant toward me, even hesitant. It was as if she knew something she wasn't saying. Then, one night, everything changed. It was late, past midnight. Emily had gone to bed hours ago, or at least I thought she had. I was in my study, trying to focus on some paperwork, but my mind kept drifting back to her words. If I could go back, I don't know if I would have said yes. I felt like I was suffocating. I needed air. I stepped out into the hallway, making my way toward the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard it, Emily's voice. Low, urgent. "I know," she sighed. "It's not like I planned for this to happen." I stopped dead in my tracks. She was in the living room. Her back was turned to me, phone pressed against her ear. "I feel stuck," she said. "Josh is a good man, but he's not exciting. I don't know how I ended up here." I gripped the doorframe, my breath catching in my throat. "Josh, that was me. If I could do it all over again," she continued, her voice quiet but clear. I wouldn't date him. I wouldn't marry him." A long silence stretched between her and the person on the other end of the call. My heart pounded so loudly in my ears I barely heard the next words. "There's someone else." I couldn't breathe. My fingers dug into the wood of the doorframe as I struggled to process what I had just heard. Someone else. The voice on the other end of the line, slightly muffled, said something I couldn't make out. Emily let out a bitter laugh. It's not just that. I feel like I settled. And now, here I am, pretending everything's fine when it's not. Settled. That word hit me harder than anything else. Was that all I was to her? A safety net? A backup plan? The conversation continued, each word cutting deeper than the last. Have you told him? The other person asked. No, Emily replied quickly. What's the point? It's not like I'm going to leave him. I mean, it's comfortable, safe. And besides, she hesitated, there's someone else. A punch to the gut wouldn't have hurt this much. My entire body felt numb, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation, but there wasn't one. She had said it. I had heard it with my own ears. I wanted to storm into the room, to demand answers, to make her say it to my face. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows, careful not to make a sound. My hands were shaking as I turned and walked back to my study. I sat in the darkness, staring blankly at my desk. The truth was unbearable. Emily didn't love me. Maybe she never really had. I sat there for hours, paralyzed by a mix of anger, sorrow, and betrayal. The weight of it pressed down on my chest until I felt like I couldn't breathe. By the time the first rays of dawn filtered through the blinds, my mind was made up. There was nothing left to salvage. I couldn't stay with someone who saw me as a mistake. Emily might have settled for me, but I wasn't going to settle for a life built on lies. I started packing my things. The house was silent as I moved through it, the early morning light casting long shadows across the walls. Emily was still asleep, her soft breathing audible from the bedroom as I carefully opened the closet to gather my clothes. My hands trembled as I pulled a duffel bag off the shelf. Each movement felt heavy, as though my limbs were weighed down by the enormity of what I was doing. I packed only the essentials, clothes, my laptop, a few sentimental items like the watch my late father had given me, and the leather-bound journal where I occasionally jotted down my thoughts. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to be gone before she woke up. The hardest part was leaving behind the little pieces of our life together. The framed photos on the dresser of us smiling at the Grand Canyon. The quirky coffee mugs we had collected over the years. Even the blanket we had snuggled under during countless movie nights. All of it felt like it belonged to another world, one I no longer had a place in. As I zipped up the bag, my eyes fell on the small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside was the handwritten letter I had given Emily on our first wedding anniversary, a heartfelt declaration of my love and commitment to her. Without thinking, I opened the box, took out the letter, and placed it on top of my things. I didn't know why, but it felt like taking it back was a small way of reclaiming something I had lost. Before leaving, I hesitated at the kitchen table. I felt like I owed her an explanation, but words failed me. Finally, I scribbled a simple note on a piece of paper from the drawer. I heard you. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. Josh. I placed it on the counter where she would see it. A part of me hoped she'd wake up, run out, and beg me to stay. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. I turned and walked out the door, the cold morning air hitting me like a slap as I stepped into the driveway. My car was parked at the curb. As I loaded my bag into the trunk, I took one last look at the house. The curtains in our bedroom were drawn. A faint movement behind them. Was she watching? Had she heard me leave? It didn't matter anymore. I couldn't let myself dwell on it. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away. Away from the lies. Away from the betrayal. Away from the woman I had loved, but who had never truly loved me back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The road stretched before me, endless and unfamiliar. I had no real destination in mind, just the need to keep moving. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white from the pressure. The betrayal, the lies, the years wasted. It all churned inside me like a storm I couldn't escape. I pulled into a roadside diner after driving for what felt like hours. My stomach was in knots, but I knew I had to eat something, even if just to keep myself from collapsing under the weight of it all. A waitress came over, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes. "What can I get you, hon?" "Just coffee," I muttered, She nodded, pouring the steaming liquid into the cup in front of me. I stared into it, watching the ripples, feeling just as lost as the reflection staring back at me. Everything I had built, everything I had believed in, it was gone. Emily had made her choice, and in doing so, she had left me with no choice but to walk away. I thought about calling someone, maybe my best friend, Brandon, but what would I even say? Hey, man, turns out my wife has been cheating on me for months, and I just walked out on my entire life. The thought made me feel sick. Instead, I sat there, drinking my coffee in silence, feeling the weight of my own existence pressing down on me. Hours passed before I finally decided what to do next. I needed to find a place to stay, somewhere far enough away that I wouldn't be tempted to go back. I searched for cheap motels on my phone and found one about 20 miles out. It wasn't much, but it was something. I checked in, threw my bag on the floor, and collapsed onto the stiff mattress. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, the wallpaper peeling at the edges. It felt as empty as I did. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. I wasn't just spending the night away from home. I had left my home, my wife, my life, and there was no going back. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying Emily's words in my head. He makes me feel alive again. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear her voice, the casual cruelty of it, the way she spoke about me like I was nothing. By the time the sun started to rise, I knew I had to do something, anything, to keep from drowning in my own thoughts. So, I got up. I showered, dressed, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. It smelled different here, away from the familiar streets of my old life. It smelled like something I hadn't felt in a long time. A fresh start. The motel room wasn't home, but for now, it was all I had. The first few days after leaving Emily blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. I kept waking up, expecting to see her next to me, only to be met with the cold emptiness of a room that didn't belong to me. I spent hours scrolling through my phone, mindlessly staring at old photos of us, vacations, birthdays, even random nights on the couch that once felt special. Now, they felt like a cruel joke. How long had she been lying to me? How long had I been living in ignorance, believing in something that had already crumbled beneath my feet? I had no job lined up, no clear plan of what to do next. I knew I had savings to keep me afloat for a while, but I also knew I couldn't sit around in a cheap motel forever, wallowing in self-pity. So, I forced myself to move forward, one small step at a time. The first thing I did was find a more permanent place to stay. After a few days of searching, I managed to get a short-term lease on a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a bare-bones space with plain white walls and a tiny kitchenette, but it was mine. Moving in was a quiet, solitary process. I didn't have much to bring with me, just the essentials I had packed the morning I left. The apartment felt hollow, the silence pressing in on me, but at least it was a space where I could start over. To fill the void, I turned to something that had always brought me peace: woodworking. I found a small community workshop a few miles away, a place where people came to build, repair, and create. It was exactly what I needed. I threw myself into my projects, letting my hands work while my mind processed everything. The sound of sanding, carving, and hammering became therapeutic. The repetition of movement, the smell of fresh wood shavings. It gave me a sense of purpose when everything else felt uncertain. Days turned into weeks, and though the pain of Emily's betrayal hadn't disappeared, it had started to feel more distant, like an old wound that still ached but no longer bled. Then, out of nowhere, Claire reached out. I was in my workshop, sanding down a coffee table, when my phone buzzed. Claire, hey Josh, can we talk? There's something you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me knew that whatever she had to say, I needed to hear it. I texted back. Sure. Where? We met at a quiet cafe the next day. Claire looked nervous, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She hesitated before speaking. I should have told you earlier, she said finally, but I didn't know how. A pit formed in my stomach. Told me what? She took a deep breath. Emily was seeing someone from work. His name is Kyle. It wasn't just flirting, Josh. It was a full-blown affair. And it's been going on for months. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I had already suspected it. How long? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Claire looked down. At least 6 months. Maybe longer. 6 months. That meant while I was planning date nights, while I was supporting her through work stress, while I was still believing in our marriage, she had been with him. Claire shifted uncomfortably. I didn't tell you because I kept hoping she'd end it. I told her she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen. I exhaled slowly, trying to absorb it all. Why are you telling me this now? Claire looked me in the eyes. Because she's been trying to reach you. She says she wants to talk. To explain. I laughed bitterly. Explain what? That she got bored? That I was just a safety net? Claire winced. I don't think she ever stopped caring about you. But she. I held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. There was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to say. I stood up. Thank you for telling me, Claire. But I don't need to hear from her. Not now. Not ever. Claire gave me a sad smile. You deserve better, Josh. I nodded, pocketing my keys. Yeah, I think I do. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt something unexpected. Closure. Emily had made her choice. And now, I was finally making mine. Walking out of that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Claire's words still echoed in my head, but instead of anger, I felt something close to relief. I had spent so much time wondering why Emily had done what she did, what I had done wrong, what I could have changed, but now, I realized that none of it mattered anymore. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. For the first time in years, I was free. I drove back to my apartment, rolled down the windows, and let the cool air fill my lungs. It was a small thing, but it felt like a symbolic release, a way of letting go of the weight that had been sitting on my chest. That night, I sat in my nearly empty living room, a half-finished coffee table in front of me, and just breathed. No Emily, no lies, no constant overthinking. Just me and the quiet. And for once, the quiet didn't feel so suffocating. Finding a new purpose. The next few weeks were about one thing. Rebuilding. Not just my apartment, but myself. I worked longer hours at the workshop, pouring every bit of my energy into creating something out of nothing. Furniture orders started trickling in from word of mouth, and before I knew it, I had people actually paying me for my work. I hadn't felt this kind of purpose in years. I even reconnected with old friends, people I had unintentionally drifted from during my marriage. They were surprised to hear what had happened, but no one said, I told you so. Instead, they reminded me of who I used to be before I got lost in trying to be the perfect husband to someone who never really wanted me. One night, Brandon dragged me out to a bar. You need to start living again, man, he said. Not just working yourself into the ground. I hesitated. The idea of meeting someone new, of putting myself out there, felt wrong, like I was betraying something. But then I realized I wasn't betraying anything. That life was over. Emily had seen to that. So I let myself go. I had a few drinks, talked with strangers, even laughed. A real, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard from myself in far too long. And that's when I met her. An unexpected connection. Her name was Sophie. She had warm brown eyes and a confidence that was both intimidating and captivating. She was flipping through a book at the bar. A classic, something old and poetic. You actually reading that, or just trying to look smart? I found myself teasing. She smirked. Would it impress you if I was? Maybe. I grinned. Or maybe I'd just ask for a summary. She laughed. A full, uninhibited laugh that made something in my chest loosen. We talked for hours. About books, about traveling, about life. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Emily. I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was just there. In the moment. By the time we left, she handed me her number. Call me sometime, if you want. And for the first time since my life fell apart, I actually wanted to. Sophie's number sat in my phone for a few days before I finally worked up the nerve to call. Not because I was nervous about her, but because I was nervous about me. Was I really ready for this? Could I open myself up again after everything I had been through? But then I remembered something. I didn't know my past any more of my present. So, I called her. We met for coffee the next afternoon, and just like before, conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people enjoying each other's company. And that was enough. I wasn't trying to replace Emily. I wasn't looking for revenge or a rebound or some grand romantic gesture. I was simply existing, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Letting go for good. A few weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. Emily, Josh, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but can we talk? I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. I didn't hate her anymore. I wasn't even angry. But I also knew that whatever she had to say didn't matter. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. So, I deleted the message without replying. That was the moment I truly let go. Not just of her, but of the version of myself that had spent years trying to be enough for someone who had never valued me in the first place. Building a new life. Months passed, and life didn't just go on. It thrived. My woodworking business took off, slowly transforming from a side project into something real. I started getting custom requests, bigger orders, even inquiries from local businesses. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was mine. I moved into a better apartment, one that I actually took the time to make feel like home. I filled it with pieces I had built myself, furniture that wasn't just practical, but meaningful. And Sophie? She was still around. We weren't rushing anything, weren't forcing anything. It was new and easy and exactly what I needed. One evening, as we sat on my couch, she picked up a small wooden box from my shelf. "What's this?" she asked. I smiled. "Open it." Inside was the wedding anniversary letter I had once written to Emily, the one I had taken back the night I left. Sophie read it silently, then looked up at me. "This was for her?" I nodded. "Yeah, but I keep it to remind myself of something." "What's that?" "That I loved right, even if she didn't." She reached across the couch, lacing her fingers with mine. "You're going to be okay. You know that?" And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living.